In Newfoundland and Labrador, a ballot recount is now into its fourth day in the riding of Terra Nova-The Peninsulas, and it's unclear how many more days it could take. The race was one of the tightest of the federal election, with the Liberal candidate, Anthony Germain, overtaking the Conservative candidate by just 12 votes. The CBC's Heather Gillis is here to explain what's going on in this recount. She is in St. John's. Heather, what's the holdup here?
Well, David, right now it's disputed ballots. There are 1,041 of them, and the Newfoundland and Labrador Supreme Court judge who is overseeing this process says that that's an unprecedented number. So originally when the vote was counted in this riding after election night, there were 597 rejected ballots. So to have this disputed ballot number go up to 1,041 now is a big increase. But the judge says he's going to go over each and every single one of those ballots, all 1,041 of them. So as you can imagine now, this is going to take some time. The judge says he was going to start this process today, and it's going to take a few days, and it might even be into next week, because he has to make a decision on all of these ballots. So this recount started on Monday morning, and then by Tuesday evening, about 40,000 of the ballots were counted, except for the disputed ones. So now the fate of them are in the hands of that judge. Liberal Anthony Germain originally won this riding by just 12 votes, enough to trigger this automatic recount. And Germain says the wait has been nerve-wracking, but remains confident, while the Conservative candidate, Jonathan Rowe, says he's lost a little bit of sleep while waiting for these final results. Here's what they had to say.
Democracy can be messy at the best of times, but it's really meticulous to watch a bunch of people, like 60, 80 people from Elections Canada, the Conservatives, Liberals, dissect 41,000 ballots, I think is in total, and go through them and break them all down to get to the number that we're at right now. So it's meticulous, it's painstaking, and I'd be lying if I said I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed in how much time it's taking, but this takes a lot of time to count that many ballots.
Well, I mean, Judgment Day is scary, and it can go either way. The judge is doing, we have a good system in Canada where there's a lot of safety measures, a lot of checks, and the judge understands the importance of taking everything into consideration and really doing a good, thorough job. And we're comfortable waiting until tomorrow hearing. We don't want to rush this process, and we're thankful to live in a society, in a country where we're able to get good results that go through the process.
Okay, Judgment Day is scary. And Heather, it's interesting. We went from a 12-vote margin to an extra 444 votes in dispute over the 597 that were rejected. So, you can see the two sides with the lawyers in there making their case for these particular ballots to go one way or another. So what does the judge consider when going through all of this? Because this is a big number.
Yeah, so there are a few things. So these disputed ballots are ones that the lawyers couldn't come to any kind of agreement on. So the lawyers for both sides group ballots with similar issues together, and then they make submissions to the judge on how each of these classifications should be dealt with. So those submissions could factor into his decision. But there are also some guidelines from Elections Canada that come from the Judicial Recount Handbook. And there are things to consider in that about rejecting ballots. So things like if the X isn't marked to the right of the candidate's name inside a circle, or if there are multiple X's for multiple candidates, well, that ballot could be rejected as well. They also have to reject ballots that might have writing in them, maybe someone's name, something that could identify a person who cast the vote. And sometimes they also can't accept ballots that weren't initialed by elections workers, or again, if the ballot wasn't supplied by Elections Canada. So there are a number of things for the judge to consider when he goes through this process.
12 votes on election night. We knew this was going to be a close one and go on for days. Heather Gillis in St. John's, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, the counting also continues in some other ridings. A judicial recount is underway in the Ontario riding of Milton East, Halton Hills South. The top two candidates were separated by just 29 votes after the results were validated, and this prompted a mandatory judicial recount. Plus, there's a recount in Windsor-Tecumseh Lakeshore. It's set to begin next week. The Liberal candidate Eric Kuzmierczak requested a judicial recount after he was behind by just 77 votes once the results were validated. But the results are final in the Quebec riding of Terrebonne, and the Liberal candidate was elected by one vote. Now, despite the certified results, the Bloc Québécois is now calling on the Superior Court of Quebec to order a by-election in the riding. Elections Canada says there were issues with the mail-in ballots sent to voters. Some had the wrong return postal code on the label that went on the envelope, and this resulted in at least one ballot being sent back to the voter?
There's a law. It appears clear. We have a case. We go forward because we want this election to be held properly, and that's it. There may be wrongdoing without the intention of performing wrongdoing. It's, of course, a mistake, which has been admitted with the consequences of this admission.
Michael Pal is a professor at the University of Ottawa, and one of his primary areas of research is election law. So, Michael Pal, you're the perfect person to talk to today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, one vote defeat in Terrebonne for the Bloc, and one Bloc Québécois ballot returned to sender because Elections Canada had the wrong postal code on the label. Do they have a case?
It's an unusual scenario, to be sure. There are provisions in the Elections Act to deal with this kind of scenario. This is what we would call an irregularity. So the Act allows you to go to court to challenge a result if you think there's fraud or corruption or what's called an illegal practice. That's not on the table here. The idea is, were there clerical errors? Was there maladministration? Were there mistakes made? Looks like there were mistakes here. I believe Elections Canada said there were 5 additional ballots where there are issues with the postal code. And so the law is very clear on this. The only thing to do after the preliminary results are in, the validation, and then the recount is to go to court under Section 524 of the Elections Act and to claim there were irregularities that affected the result of the election.
Right.
Usually it's hard to prove the result was affected. There's enough votes to have changed the outcome. Here it's pretty clear because of that 1 vote margin.
Right. So about that, like this doesn't, and to the Bloc Québécois' credit, they're saying something wrong happened here. They're not engaging any election conspiracy. This sounds like human error, screw up, that sort of a thing. But if it's not fraud or the deliberate misconduct that you outlined there, can they challenge it? Like, how strong is their case? Because one Bloc ballot returned in a 1 vote loss, I mean, that materially affected this outcome.
Right, so they have to establish it was an irregularity. It looks like they have pretty good evidence of that. Let's see what they file in court. Let's see what additional ballots we have. Then they would have to convince the judge that the numbers were enough to change the result. That seems pretty straightforward. But then the court still has some discretion. They can decide if they think this is a serious enough situation, even if there is 1 or 5 or 6 irregularities, to annul the result, which is the option they have, and then a by-election would be the outcome. And so there's still some discretion in the judge's hands there. They try to guard the fact that voters already cast ballots in the general election in this riding, and they want to respect that. It's everyone's right to vote. So there's a high hurdle or a high bar to clear to get a by-election.
But, you know, when you look at this, you know, using the common person test, you know, the Bloc candidate, Nathalie Sinclair-Desgagne, she's got a pretty legitimate beef here, right? So I know it's a high hurdle. I mean, but you know, Elections Canada made the point that there's never been an application to contest an election that resulted in the election being annulled. So given that there is no precedent for this happening, the bar is high, but is it insurmountable? Because in a case like this, it looks like the Bloc they're getting screwed here.
I think they have a very strong case in this situation. We haven't seen this necessarily before. There was a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court from the 2011 election. That was the Opitz case.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court really was reluctant to overturn the result there. But that was a situation where everybody who cast a ballot was a citizen over 18 who lived in the riding. So someone who had the right to vote and was eligible. Here it's different because it was someone that was prohibited from voting through no fault of their own. So the one challenge, I think, that is, or the major challenge that is there for the Bloc and for the candidate who lost is there's part of the Elections Act that says it's on the voter, it's the voter's responsibility to get their ballot in on time. Can't blame Canada Post. If the ballot arrives late, sometimes ballots do. So the courts will have to read that provision also with the other provisions about irregularities, along with the voter's right to vote, which is in Section 3 of the Charter.
Right, so because I wonder about that yes, it is your responsibility, but the state made some mistakes here, right? The government, like Elections Canada, somebody put the wrong postal code on the label. Then Canada Post, there were others that had the wrong postal code, but Canada Post got it there. And in this case, they did not. If the voter did everything right and through a series of compounded errors from Election Canada and Canada Post, I mean, how do you interpret something like that legally?
If that's the chain of events, it sounds exactly why we allow results to be overturned if there's an irregularity. It's got to be enough to have made a difference, right? If someone wins the riding by 10,000 votes and 5 people got the wrong postal code on their special ballot, why are we going to rerun the whole election, even though it obviously matters a lot to that small number of people? But here, because the result is so close, it's exactly the kind of scenario that the Act anticipates. Some other countries in the world, it happens faster. The Election Commission, their version of Elections Canada, can overturn the result if they think there were problems. Here, it's this longer, a bit more cumbersome process of going to court, but it's designed to give us all more certainty that we've got nonpartisan, objective people looking at it.
Yeah, no, it's important to trust in institutions, and judicial recounts are done under tremendous oversight and rigor and representation by all sides. But, you know, most Canadians vote either in the advance polls in person, they put the ballot right in, or they do it on election day. The special ballots are designed to accommodate things, and people like them for the convenience, but there have been issues in multiple ridings in this election. None with the 1-vote margin, of course. We'll see what happens in the Newfoundland riding with the 12-vote margin. But the Elections Canada is announcing a review. They've announced a review of the special ballot. So what do you think should come of that? Because this is not the first election we've heard of issues there. It's just the first election with 1 vote actually deciding the seat.
Yeah, I think the review is very welcome. More and more people want to vote other than in person on election day. They want to vote in advance at the polling station, or they want to vote by special ballot, even if they're in Canada. And then we have lots of Canadians who are entitled to vote who live abroad. They also vote by special ballot. Right. The system is a little bit old-fashioned, though, because we don't necessarily know who all the candidates are until the election is called. So you have to apply to get a special ballot. You have to send it in. Obviously, it would be a lot faster to do it online, but then we have very serious cyber security and election integrity concerns. So that's not a viable option, but are there procedures to make the system a bit faster so if there are problems, they can be identified earlier and people can still get their ballot in time? That's, I think, where we need to go.
Okay, so it's going to go to a judge. I remember covering a municipal election back in Newfoundland and Labrador in the town of Paradise where it was an absolute tie between the 2 mayoral candidates, and they put the names on a piece of paper and drew the winner out of a recycling bin. How does Elections Canada resolve a tie? Does it just order a by-election, or is there like a coin toss?
We have the boring by-election option. Someplace in the U.S. to do a coin flip, which is very cinematic, but we've got the by-election.
Okay, all right. Michael Powell, we appreciate your insight on this. Michael Powell at the University of Ottawa. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.